For many of us living over here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's summer vacation time. With all those great sounds. You know the ones I'm talking about. Gentle waves lapping the edge of the sand. Something cool and bubbly being poured over ice. Unless, of course, you're heading to a vacation hotspot where local residents are sick at the sight of you. In which case, this is what you might be hearing instead. That's a recent rally against mass tourism in Lisbon. Popular tourist destinations across southern Europe have seen demonstrations at what's being described as overtourism. And there's been growing rumblings of discontent in hotspots in Japan too. On this week's show, we're getting into the economic principles behind this phenomenon. It's more than just tourism demand exceeding local supply or capacity. It's also about economic trade-offs. Less tourism means less tax revenues. We'll take a look at the problem in places like Japan.
Locals are now thinking, well, all these tourists are coming in, they're living the life of Riley, and actually they're making it more expensive for me to visit places in my own country.
Some of the measures that have already been taken, including hiding the public bus route to a popular park in Barcelona.
They got Google Maps to remove it from Google Maps so that when tourists are saying, how do we get to Park Güell, it didn't appear.
And we've even got tips for where you should go to avoid the throngs of tourists and the angry residents.
Which has got beautiful, often empty beaches, even in the height of summer.
This is Reuters Econ World. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins in Dublin. Overtourism occurs when too many visitors flock to a destination. It's something that's really grabbed headlines in the post-pandemic travel boom. But really, it's not a new phenomenon. Visitors have been crowding picturesque places like Venice for centuries. And the causes of overtourism, an oversupply of humans and inadequate capital investment in housing and infrastructure, are also problems affecting cities dealing with inward migration. It's just overtourism is a problem concentrated on particular places at particular times, usually the sweatiest months of the year. So to get into it all, I spoke to two people living and reporting in areas in the thick of it, so to speak. John Geddy is a lead writer for Japan and China based in Tokyo, and Charlie Devereux is breaking news lead writer for Iberia based in Madrid. John and Charlie, welcome to Reuters Econ World.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got to ask before we get started, where are you guys going on your holidays?
I'm going to the, sunny climes of Aberdeen in Scotland, where I'm from. So my annual pilgrimage home. But I tend to spend my holidays in Japan, traveling around Japan. I went with my family a month ago, camping up in this historic town called Aizu Wakamatsu, which is kind of famous for having a castle and a very famous center for sake brewing, which is in Fukushima Prefecture. And I like to go to the beaches down in Izu Peninsula, which is kind of accessible from Tokyo. And then in the winter, skiing in the Japanese Alps, which is also very accessible from Tokyo. So yeah, I make my annual pilgrimage back home to see parents and family and whatnot. But I usually spend my holidays here in Japan.
I was about to say, poor you're not going to get any sunshine when you go to Aberdeen on your holidays, but it sounds like you have fantastic holidays all year round, so I don't feel sorry for you at all. And I have to say, the only way you get me camping is if you offered me a shot of sake with it. So well done for combining both of those. Charlie, what about you? You heading off somewhere nice?
Yeah, tomorrow, in fact.
Ooh.
And my wife has persuaded me to try out camper van life. We've rented a camper van and we're going to the Central Pyrenees to, I guess, just go hiking and river swimming and reservoir swimming. It should be fun. I've never been that keen on camping, but she's tried to swim the camper van. She used to have one when she was younger, and she wants me to get into it.
Rather you than me, I have to say.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
So, Charlie, actually, if I can start with you, because I feel like Spain is one of those countries that we most associate with overtourism. Maybe it's because I think we May all have seen those images from last year when residents of Barcelona fired water pistols at tourists. What exactly is driving this anger?
Well, I mean, you could argue that Spain kind of invented mass tourism, at least in Europe.
Yeah.
In the 60s when it opened up and, the whole of the Mediterranean coast, all these classic places, Benidorm, all of that. So, over-tourism, you could say, has probably existed for a long time, but it's becoming more acute. And I think we've really observed something, especially since the pandemic. I think the pandemic kind of flicked a switch in people. Maybe they had an opportunity to see what their cities, their towns look like without lots of tourists around, and they were like, "Whoa, that's quite nice."
Yeah,
it's quite. We can get access to all of these, restaurants, cafes, whatever. And so we've seen a real rise in protests since. So as you referenced, the water pistol is being fired at tourists.
Yeah.
But we're seeing it, in all the hotspots, the Balearic Islands, the Canary Islands, all along the coast, Valencia, Barcelona. But I think they've probably been most acute in Barcelona.
And what's driving it? Like, what is exactly the issue? Or that maybe there's more than one?
I think there's just a sensation of just too many people. The main thing is the pressure on housing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the mayor of Barcelona was saying that rents have gone up 68% in 10 years. I think the price of homes is up 38% in that same period. That's the main, it's pressure on that, pressure on services, pressure on, bus lines. For another thing that they've done in Barcelona is they removed the bus routes from going to Parc Güell, which is this this famous park designed by Antonio Gaudi, because locals couldn't get on the buses because they were just full of tourists. So there's all that sort of thing. There is a real. I think you really get a sense in places like that. I mean, I live in Madrid. I don't get that same. It's building up.
Yeah.
But in places like Barcelona, there is just some people are just fed up with it. They just can't. They feel like they've lost their city.
They got rid of the bus route in Barcelona.
They didn't get rid of the bus route. They got Google Maps to remove it from Google Maps so that when tourists are saying, how do we get to Parc Güell, it didn't appear.
Wow. So how are tourists getting there now? Like, what's the main mode of transport for them?
I guess they took it. They walked or took a taxi, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
John, over-tourism is an issue in Japan as well, right? It's experienced record numbers of tourists post the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's maybe a slightly newer phenomenon than what you're seeing in Spain. I mean, certainly, since the pandemic, since 2023, there's been a very sharp rise in the number of tourists coming to Japan. I mean, that's been prompted by the fact that the yen has been kind of historically weak. So everything in Japan has seemed, by comparison, much cheaper for foreign tourists.
Yeah.
I think the statistics show that last year, Japan was the most visited destination by tourists in Asia, surpassing Thailand for, one of the first times in a while. It's creating kind of the similar stresses, I think, that to what was described in Spain in terms of impacts on, public infrastructure, etc. I think the other thing that sort of creates tension in Japan is that there's kind of very strict kind of accepted social etiquette of how people should behave in public, and that has created a lot of kind of cultural friction, I think, with a lot of tourists coming in. I mean, you see these kind of videos that go viral of social media influencers kind of swinging on Tory gates, and that then goes viral and creates like a kind of a bad image of tourists and those fears of over-tourism. So it's really got up a lot of a head of steam in the last couple of years.
So what are the things that are a big no-no for foreign tourists in Japan? Like, it is known as a place that has a particular social etiquette.
Yeah, I would say, one thing that kind of stands out is that you have to be very cognizant not to kind of inconvenience or disturb other people in public.
Right.
So that is a typical one that, if you're riding on a commuter bus and you're playing a loud video on your phone, or, your young kids are acting up and jumping on the seats or something, that maybe, I guess, it's not great behavior, but people might sort of turn a bit more of a blind eye to in some countries. That would be really kind of unacceptable here. And the other thing I suppose, is that a lot of the places that tourists visit, like Shinto shrines and temples, there are very strict kind of rules and things to follow there. So it is very important to kind of read the kind of public messaging about what you should and shouldn't do when you visit these areas, and just to be cognizant that you not to kind of inconvenience other people, basically.
Anti-foreigner sentiment, John, it did emerge as an issue in the most recent elections in Japan, right?
It did emerge as an issue, and we had this kind of fringe far-right party called Sanseito, who actually made some pretty decent gains in the upper house election that we just had. They won 15 seats, kind of propelling them into mainstream politics, although they remain, a fairly small force in politics. But they certainly capitalized on this kind of anti-foreigner feeling. Those kind of ideas are both around, are the foreign residents in Japan abiding by the rules, and are they taking advantage of the system here, etc. But also those issues around over-tourism are also coming to the fore.
All right, so it turns out Econ World listeners like a quiz. So I'm back with another one. This time, we want to know which was the most popular city for international tourists last year. Is it A, Tokyo, B, Barcelona, or C, Paris? No Googling or ChatGPTing the answer. You'll find out at the end of the show. When we come back, we'll take a look at the trade-offs facing governments trying to keep the tourist dollars flowing and local residents happy. Charlie, despite water pistols being fired at tourists, they're still coming to Spain, right? The country's expecting a record 100 million visitors this year, is that right?
That's right. There was a record 94 million last year, and the projection is they're going to break the 100 million mark this year.
Wow.
So they keep coming.
And for some places, like in the Canary Islands, the numbers are enormous in terms of like the size of the local population versus the influx.
Yeah, for example, in Barcelona, I think there were 26 million tourists that came last year, and it's a city of 1.6 million.
Wow.
And just even looking at 100 million, that's 2 foreign tourists for every resident. It's about 48 million people.
Right. And the same story in Japan. Tourist arrivals, I think this year are expected to beat last year's record, John.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting comparison. I mean, I think they're anticipating that tourist arrivals this year will break 40 million, which, funnily enough, is actually a target that the government themselves set back in 2016. As they were looking forward to the Olympics that were happening in 2020, they actually kind of set a target of hitting 40 million tourists. So it's not quite happened to schedule, but it's happened now a few years later. So yeah, it's not as if the country wasn't prepared or wasn't expecting these. And, by comparison to the numbers that you just heard from Spain, some Spanish cities, I mean, it's kind of relatively modest overall.
And it's interesting you mentioned that Japan had a target, right? Because, of course, for both countries and for countries in general that get a lot of tourists, I mean, it's a boon for the local economy. Like it is, in theory, both countries should be cheering this, right? I mean, Charlie, just for Spain, I was looking at some of the stats. Tourism contributes more than 13% of its annual economic output. And
that's right.
Yeah, for a lot of these southern European countries, as their tourism has boomed, it's kind of no coincidence their economies are growing faster than the EU average. So it is a growth driver.
Yeah, and it employs 3 million people, the industry. And Spain has been absolutely booming the last 2 or 3 years. It grew 3.2% last year, 2.4%. It's going to grow 2.4% this year, is projected. And that's the fastest growing country in the OECD, the fastest growing developed country. So it's a difficult thing when people talk about kind of, putting restrictions on tourism is why bite the hand that feeds you?
Exactly. And John, for Japan, actually even more fascinating, I was reading how tourism has become the country's second largest export sector behind, the mighty automobile sector.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how they calculate that looking as an export, because I guess it's foreign earnings coming into Japan. So yeah, if you look at it on that metric, yeah, it's kind of second now behind the automotive exports, which are kind of the backbone of Japanese industry. We all know those big Japanese automakers, Toyota, Nissan, Mazda, they roll off the tongue. But yeah, and I think especially since the pandemic, when growth in Japan has been kind of stuttering, that's really been a kind of a key driver of growth. I mean, look, I was looking at some other metrics. So in 2023, tourism contributed half of the 1.5% annual growth that Japan clocked in that year.
Yeah.
So, and if you compare that to before the pandemic, so I think the average from like 2010 to 2019, it was kind of like a tenth of the 1.2% growth that they averaged over that period. So it is quite a stark contrast, and you can see it's become, an engine of growth really since the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, Charlie, in Spain, tourism has been important for such a long time. I mean, what's the kind of the debate inside the country, in terms of, are there fears from some that you're going to bite the hand that feeds you, if you're spraying tourists with water guns, although it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't seem to be having much of a deterrent effect, but that you will end up hurting a very, very important source of cash, source of tax revenue.
There's definitely a lot of pressure. It's a big. It is, unlike you're saying, Japan has other things. The auto industry, tourism is the motor of the Spanish economy. So while you have a lot of locals complaining and protesting and saying, our quality of life is being affected by this, you've definitely got a lot of people saying, well, hang on, this is how a lot of people make their living.
Yeah. This
is very important for the Spanish economy. And we should be very careful about, the message that we're sending out is being quite damaging. So, I think people are very divided about it.
And looking at what people, because governments have tried to deal with this issue in various different ways, right? There seems to be sort of like additional fees on tourists. So we saw that in Venice with their entry tax during the summer months. And there's that kind of the cutting down on short-term rentals or limiting the number of cruise ships entering ports. Interesting, actually, cruise ship passengers are particularly unwelcome, it seems, because they don't actually stay overnight in a city and they don't maybe spend as much in restaurants and cafes.
Yeah.
And then in the US, we've seen national parks, requiring visitors to make advance entry reservations. Charlie, Barcelona is planning on cutting down on short-term rentals, isn't it, by 2028?
Barcelona really is a kind of sandbox, you could say, for experimentation.
It does have a beach. In
overtourism policy.
Yeah.
You've got this ban coming in by 2028. They're limiting cruise liners as well. They've got a tourism tax. They're doing all this stuff, as I mentioned before, removing transportation information from Google Maps.
That's wild.
But, there's a bit of contradiction at the same time. They're also planning to expand their airport, build another runway. So,
right.
There's a push me, pull you here of like, well, yes, we're concerned about our residents, but also this is very important for our economy. And, we cannot stop it altogether. And so I guess it's which of these things is going to work. We're not quite sure yet. Or if at all.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it seems like the evidence from Venice is it's not really clear that tax really had much of an impact. In fact, I think they're extending it this summer. But in terms of the pressure on property, I mean, that's an issue that the government clearly has to deal with anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the housing issue is definitely exacerbated by, the short-term letting platforms.
Yeah.
But, it's an easy scapegoat for the government, as are sort of second homes by foreigners, etc. Really, the problem is in Spain that since the great financial crisis, that was 12 years ago,
yeah,
they just stopped building new homes.
Right.
I mean, they're starting to build it up again, but they're just not keeping up with demand, and that is the main problem. They've got to find a way to build new homes, loosen policies on all kinds of regulations so that they can quicken the process, get more labor for construction. There's lots of kind of problems that they need to tackle that they seem to be tackling to some extent, but not doing enough.
Tourist taxes might not necessarily deter foreign visitors, but currency moves and politics can. Those are some of the reasons why international travelers are shunning US vacations this year, potentially erasing billions of dollars from the US economy. It's a trend we've been reporting on at Reuters. You can read more of our economic coverage in my weekly newsletter. It's called Reuters Econ World, and it showcases the best of Reuters reporting on markets and economics. I'll put a sign-up link to that newsletter in the description to this week's episode. You can also sign up on the Reuters app. Just go to newsletters and search for Reuters Econ World. What about in Japan, John? What, if anything, is the government doing about overtourism?
Yeah, some of it is kind of knee-jerk stuff. So there was a kind of story that gained a lot of attention last year where there was a convenience store. Japan is famous for, having these network of konbini, what they call konbini, convenience stores where you can buy everything. So there was a convenience store that was in front of Mount Fuji, which, kind of the two iconic things about Japan. And people shared this picture online, and suddenly, floods of tourists went to this spot opposite this convenience store to take this picture, blocking the sidewalk going onto the road. So in the end, the authorities basically had to put up a screen in front of it to prevent people from taking this picture. So some of it is kind of knee-jerk stuff like that. They've also done things like you described, like they've put in quotas for example, the number of people that can climb Mount Fuji on any one day.
Okay.
You now have to apply in advance. You have to kind of book your accommodation in advance, all this kind of stuff. They have introduced, in some cases, kind of two-tiered pricing. So I think there's a famous castle in Osaka, Himeji Castle, that is from next year going to basically be charging foreigners more than those in the local area to visit the castle.
Right.
There is increasing tourist taxes. I mean, they often come out as what they call like lodging taxes. So when you book into your hotel, they're expanding the number of cities and prefectures that will charge that. And that's basically like a tourism tax that the local authorities then use to reinvest into tourist infrastructure or tourist centers or this kind of thing.
That's interesting about the tax, because of course the issue with tourists is they come in, they spend money, they pay value-added tax, things like that. But the benefits, the benefits are sort of dispersed across the economy, but the costs are kind of very much concentrated on local populations. So when Japan levies those tourist taxes, does it go back into the community that's affected by the overtourism?
Yeah, so the one I just talked about, the accommodation tax, that is kind of levied by the local government and would go back into the local area.
Okay.
But I think you hit an interesting point, because one of the issues in Japan is that a lot of tourists go on a particular tourist trail.
Yeah.
They fly to Tokyo.
Yeah.
They then get on the Shinkansen. They go down to Osaka. They go to Kyoto. Maybe they go to Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the tourism is basically isolated to, Japan's biggest cities, basically. And so I think one of the things that the government is trying to do is to promote people to go and explore other parts of Japan and provide kind of promotions and to go and explore other parts, and especially domestic tourists, try and encourage them not to go to Kyoto and try somewhere else and go, so to try and spread, I guess, the revenues that are coming in from the tourism to areas of Japan that are less traveled.
You mentioned domestic tourism there, but are the influx of overseas tourists, is that affecting domestic tourism in Japan?
Yeah.
Is it putting locals off, I suppose, is the question.
I think not only putting locals off, probably traveling to some areas, but I think the other factor in all this is that the influx of inbound tourists who are coming here and comparatively have a lot of money in their pocket because the yen is so weak, that is pushing up the costs for accommodation and stuff, and locals are then bearing those costs. So that's kind of feeding some of the resentment from overtourism, that, locals are now thinking, well, all these tourists are coming in, they're living the life of Riley, and actually they're making it more expensive for me to visit places in my own country because, prices are going up there, whether that be prices in restaurants or prices that are charged by hotels that, suddenly find themselves in demand because of inbound tourists.
We're seeing that, Charlie, in Spain too, right? I mean, in terms of the local population, their demand for sort of tourism in their own country.
Yeah, that's right. We recently did a story about how locals are being priced out of their traditional beach holiday and basically having to look elsewhere, either go north, where it's a bit rainier, a bit colder, or inland. And yeah, you're seeing a quite a significant increase because prices are going up. And in fact, that probably going to affect the industry as a whole, because half of their revenue does come from national tourism, and what we're seeing and what they're projecting is that those revenues are going to go down even as foreign tourists that keeps increasing.
We actually had Spain's economy minister on the pod recently, and he was talking about trying to decentralize the tourism. So, encouraging foreign tourists and local tourists as well to go to sort of the less, more off the beaten track sort of destinations. And he was also talking about shoulder months, which was an expression I had never heard of before. It's like the off-peak months. I mean, how's that going down? Are you seeing more tourists traveling in the off-peak period?
Well, certainly what we're seeing is, for example, all the advertising coming out from the government at the moment doesn't feature any pictures of beaches. It's all mountains, etc. It's like, please go to these other cities that you might not know of, and the whole of the there's a phenomenon in Spain known as empty Spain, or the emptied Spain, which is this idea that there are huge agglomerations of populations in the big cities and along the Mediterranean coast, and the rest of it is empty. And there's always been efforts to repopulate the middle of Spain, where there are abandoned villages, or just 2 or 3 residents. And so this kind of fits nicely into that, where if you can encourage tourism to go to those areas, that maybe you can sort of regenerate the economy there as well.
But the problem is they get really hot in the summer, right? Because they're inland.
They do.
Right?
Well, it depends where you go. If you go to the north,
okay,
it's more of a climate like Normandy in France or the UK.
Right.
Little bit warmer, slightly less rainier, but yes, there's definitely a lot of rain. And certainly you get a pattern. That's where I like to go on holiday. I love it up there. I welcome a bit of cloud and a bit of drizzle. It's great.
Yeah, I suppose the issue is where I'm from, Ireland and then the UK. We just want our vitamin D. Yeah. We just want sunshine. We don't want rain in our holidays, and that's the issue.
Well, I think that's the pattern increasingly you're going to see is Northern Europeans want their sunshine on the Mediterranean coast, and perhaps everyone who's used to sunshine all year round is going to go up to northern Spain.
Yeah,
and that's increasingly happening. It's becoming more popular over there.
You can hear that interview with Spain's economy minister, Carlos Cuerpo, on a recent episode of Reuters Econ World. I'll put a link in the description of today's show. You can also find it on the Reuters app. Go to Podcasts, Reuters Econ World, and check out the debt relief episode. Up next, the glory days of tapas bar hopping in Madrid, and why duty-free shopping is getting all the wrong sort of attention in Japan. All right, so we've got kind of the push for off-peak. We've got the push for, go off the beaten track. But what else is Spain doing? What other measures are they doing to try and deal with this issue?
Well, I think one of the main things that some cities, at least some areas, are looking at is the idea of pushing more into luxury tourism. So you're seeing that in the Balearic Islands.
Right.
And they call it quality tourism in inverted commas, and they see it as less people, more income per capita, and they argue it's more sustainable. Although I would say that's questionable, because I think that in general, more affluent people tend to consume more, and they might fly on their private jets. They live in houses that need kind of constant watering, and they use up a lot of water resources. But certainly you are seeing that in Madrid. We've seen probably half a dozen new luxury hotels that are charging, €1,000 a night. They're either constructed or refurbished. And it's certainly a strategy that we've been told that Madrid is pursuing. They want luxury tourists who come for the culture, they come for the galleries here, they come for the cuisine, and they come to stay in very nice hotels.
Charlie, I suppose the risk with that kind of targeting kind of the quality or the more affluent tourism market is that it pushes up prices for locals.
Yeah, you're certainly seeing things become more expensive in Madrid. Prices are going up, you're getting more high-end restaurants. You can measure it by, how much does your glass of wine or your beer cost in the local bars, and that's certainly going up. And locals are also complaining that it takes, you didn't used to have to kind of reserve before the pandemic. There was no kind of reservations. You could go out on the town and you could go to several really nice tapas bars and kind of muscle your way in, shoulder your way in, and you'd get a place in the bar eventually. And these days, that's not the case. You have to reserve everything. And it's generally, prices have definitely gone up. And locals are complaining about how booking for theatre, everything, it used to be much easier. Now it's harder.
So, John, in Japan, Prime Minister Ishiba, what is he doing about this, the complaints about over-tourism?
So it was a big feature of the just recently had upper house elections, and Sanseito and other parties were sort of raising the issue of what to do about this foreigner problems, not just limited to tourists, but also to kind of local residents who some parties feel are potentially taking advantages of the system in Japan, etc. So yeah, a week before the election, the Cabinet Office announced they'd set up this task force to basically kind of deal with unruly foreigners, including kind of looking into all these issues, which included, over tourism. I think they're yet to sort of put, kind of details on what exactly that looks like. It may be a continuation of some of the other, measures they have looked at in the past. But, for instance, one of the things that could come up, and I think other opposition parties have raised the question as to why this still exists, but there's tax-free shopping in Japan. So tourists can come in and basically get exempted from the 10% consumption tax. And I think opposition parties have raised questions around why does that still exist? What that's taking money away, that's taking tax revenue away that could be used, and things are already cheap for foreign tourists because the yen is so weak. So I don't know whether the ruling party will consider that among the options that they're looking at, but those are the type of things that they might consider to sort of combat the issue.
Charlie, when it comes to, it's interesting when John mentioned about one of the issues for Japan is like the behavior of the foreign tourists. And, speaking as someone who back in the day went to Barcelona in her 20s and may have indeed acted the maggot, and I do apologise to the residents. Is that an issue for Spain? Is that like the behavior of tourists? Is that what, or is that not a problem?
Perhaps they're more used to it. It has been, these kind of cheap package holidays to the Med have been around for a while. But there's definitely pushback. There's a little bit of mockery of the behavior. There's a particular phenomenon in the Balearics, especially Ibiza and Mallorca. I don't know if you've heard of the term balconing.
No.
Balconing is normally young men inebriated jumping from their balconies into pools.
Oh.
Or trying to jump from one balcony to another. There's sort of dozens, at least, a dozen deaths every summer from it. And there's a kind of mockery. There's actually kind of a league, and they keep a league of which nations have had the most deaths.
Oh, wow.
How many floors they've jumped from, all these kind of statistics. And it caused quite when the British press found out about it, it caused quite a strong reaction, let's say.
Wow.
But yeah, so there is a sort of mockery of the kind of behavior that there's kind of expected from, there's not just young Brits, but, they're kind of, I guess, the stereotype, but Germans as well, but, Northern Europeans, basically.
Yeah. For the record, I never jumped off a balcony into a pool. Anything that I did was on the ground floor. Let's just say that. Can I ask for our listeners, as I have, two people who live in, some of the most popular countries in the world for visitors, do you have top 3 tips of where to go off the beaten track?
Well, first of all, I would say the north of Spain, Galicia, Asturias, which has got beautiful, often empty beaches, even in the height of summer. For me, the best food in Spain, the best seafood, the best wine, the best beef, and absolutely stunning landscape. Especially places like Asturias, you can be on the beach and behind you is the Picos de Europa, this beautiful mountain range. It's absolutely stunning. But also central Spain has got a lot of places. I particularly like it around Cuenca, which is this beautiful old city with apartments literally hanging off a canyon. And I was talking, I'm going river swimming. Actually, near Cuenca, there's an amazing area called the Altos del Tajo. My colleague was just there this weekend, where you can, there's beautiful kind of canyons, and you can go swimming in the Tagus River, the Tagus that runs all the way down to Lisbon. And here it's crystal clear waters amongst canyons, and there's just absolutely no one there.
Oh, sounds heavenly. John, what about you? Where would you recommend people should go?
Well, Hokkaido in the very north of Japan, I mean, that's kind of a mecca and a haven during the winter time for some of the best skiing in the world. But it's a little bit more of a kind of untapped tourist destination in the summer. And especially if you come to Japan at this time of year, or when it starts to get warm, you can kind of beat the heat a bit, going up there. And they've got kind of amazing landscape and scenery and wildlife. And there's this area called the Shiratoko Peninsula, which is one of the kind of last great kind of wild places on Earth. I think they have the highest concentration of bears there of anywhere else in the world. So, there's sort of amazing nature and beauty to see up there. And most people go there to the, the ski resorts of Niseko and stuff in the winter, but it's kind of not quite as well traveled in the summer months. A lot of people who come to Japan, the typical beach holidays are to go down to Okinawa, which there are many islands in the Okinawan chain that you can visit outside of the main island of Okinawa.
Yeah.
Also, for beaches in Japan, one place that I really like to go if you come to Tokyo is kind of 3 hours by car or a couple of hours by train. You can get down to the very southern tip of Izu Peninsula to a place called Shimoda, which has really beautiful beaches and relatively accessible from the capital, white sand beaches. So that's a nice place to go if beach holiday is your thing. I guess the other one to add to this list might be the Kyushu, which is the island just south of the, or west of the main island of Japan, which has where Nagasaki and Fukuoka are located. On the southern tip of there's places like Kagoshima, which is this city with this huge volcano in the bay. I mean, it's kind of staggering scenery there. It's quite popular. That area is quite popular with kind of South Korean tourists because it's close to South Korea. But, they're definitely, you can get off the beaten track there and find some really kind of amazing scenery and wildlife down there.
I'm feeling really gutted because I'm staying in Ireland this summer because I'm getting my kitchen redone. It just made me really rather depressed because it's wet. It's wet and kind of overcast here. John, Charlie, thank you so much and have a wonderful time on your holidays, on your vacation for our American listeners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
A big thank you to Charlie and John for their time, their travel tips, and their great reporting. You can catch their work on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. As for our quiz, the question was, which was the most popular city for international tourists in 2024? The options were Tokyo, Barcelona, or Paris. And the answer is the City of Light, Paris. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week, we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, please drop us a line in the comments section of your favourite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Sound design, music composition and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vanell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Christopher Walljasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Bilkazu Labaran and Sharon Reich Garson. Our executive producer is Lila de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.